Hello, everyone. Gary here from Timeline Astrology. This is the February 2025 Sidereal forecast. So there's a lot going on in the coming months, in March and April especially. I think a lot of things are changing in big ways and ending in many ways. But that also, of course, means new beginnings in so many ways. But to channel all of that intention and dreaming of that new life for ourselves into something more real and realistic. At the moment in February, it seems unrealistic. It seems almost diluted. It's the Venus-Rahu-Neptune conjunction, especially that's bringing this energy out. And Venus and Rahu alone is a bit diluted, but Venus-Rahu-Neptune, that's like rose-tinted glasses, but then shades on top. That's like not seeing the full picture at all. That's not seeing clearly at all. It might be a time of dissociation in a way, and you might say for a very good reason. But what is a shame about that in a way is that without setting our intentions around what is possible, we are wasting this energy that is so creative and so open. And that's what we need to do in February and onwards, I would say. We need to use this time to dream up a new life, but at the same time, channel it through what is happening in our lives, right? We can set intentions when at least we're aligned with what is. Venus, of course, exalted is itself just a good time. It's at least a time for appreciating the good things in life, and more especially its exchange with Jupiter, which is now about to station direct in Taurus, its sign, is a boost to our optimism, is a boost to our sense of not only appreciation, but a gratitude. Venus could be said to be more about appreciation and Jupiter about gratitude. But the fact that they're exchanging signs in February and for the next few months until the middle of May shows that we have an ability now to really channel all of this appreciation and gratitude in a way, again, that serves us and everybody and life as it is happening, expressing itself through us. Again, not to delude ourselves that we can dream up any kind of thing and make it happen, because again, that's a waste of time. That's a waste of energy. And there's so much energy and potential here if we can only channel it through what is. So that's the overview, I would say, of February. It does offer more complexity later on in March. We might just touch on this at the end of this because I do think, again, February is a prelude to that. And especially when Venus retrogrades in March in Pisces, again, conjunct Rahu, conjunct Neptune, and then also at the time with Mercury there, and then Sun and Moon entering with the eclipse by the very end of March. And then at that time, Saturn moving in, there is obviously a traffic jam up ahead of planets. And even though in February, and by the end of February, especially with all the planets moving forward, it might feel like everything's freed up to move forward and everything's going great and it is wonderful. It is wonderful, but it's also not considering the traffic jam up ahead. It's kind of like when you're in traffic and it starts to free up. The tendency for us, and this is more especially once Mars goes direct, which I'll talk about as well here. Once Mars goes direct by the end of February and we feel like we're getting somewhere, we're going somewhere. If you've been in traffic jam for a while and then it starts to free up, you're more likely to actually put the foot down a bit more and accelerate a bit more than you should be likely. And that's also because of Mercury, which is speeding ahead of circumstances now, as well as Mercury speeds through three signs before it retrogrades in March as well. So we're getting ahead of ourselves. We're moving too fast. And then by March, we're hitting another snag. We're hitting a major traffic jam up ahead now. And actually, not even a traffic jam, but actually a traffic accident. That's going to be like a long tailback in March and April. So so again, think about this in terms of February is opening things up and moving things forward, and it feels positive and it feels optimistic and it feels more than that. It feels just idealistic and even maybe deluded, but then hits a snag later on. And if you can think about March in that way up ahead, then you won't get too carried away with whatever you're thinking up or dreaming up in February, is what I want to say. So let's talk about each of the transits I mentioned there. So Mercury is moving through three signs. Now, as soon as a planet moves swiftly through three signs in 1 month, that it's about to go retrograde. Mercury is moving ahead of the sun, ahead of circumstance, and our minds get ahead of ourselves, essentially, and we start planning and planning and planning ahead. Nothing wrong with that. We need to do it. That's what the planet is doing. But as long as we are mindful that later on, by the middle of March, Mercury will stop moving forward, it will slow down and then station and go backwards from the middle of March. So factor that in now, and the fact that Mercury is retrograding in Pisces, where it's a bit overwhelmed with all the things that it has to think about and do. It might be a bit like the more you put on the list now and the more you schedule in now because you feel like you can, and it's like opening up in February, the more you're adding to your burden in a way in March. So don't overdo it in February, is what I want to say. And factor in that you have to actually redo and rethink everything that you're planning right now. Mercury's mostly in Aquarius in February from the 11th to the 27th, and it's conjunct Saturn. So even though it's moving fast, it's conjunct Saturn. So we do have to think about the long-term consequences. There's no way we're going to get away with doing anything without thinking about the implications. And there's a bit of a tricky thing here with Aquarius and with Mercury joining Saturn in Aquarius, which is, by the way, ending its transit in Aquarius in the next few weeks. So this is Saturn's last song as well in Aquarius. Saturn in Aquarius is really hammering home this point about implications. What are we doing long term? And what are we doing now actually that has an implication for the long term? And Aquarius doesn't always consider the long term. In another way, when you consider that we cannot get away with anything, we cannot just do whatever and it not to have a consequence. So again, getting on board with the long term, the bigger picture, our big ideals, our big ambitions, is to also get on board with the bigger picture, the things that are outside of us, the big humanitarian issues even. So it's again deluded to think that we are separate entities completely on our own with free will, thinking that we can do whatever the hell we want, whenever we want. That's delusion. But once we allow ourselves to align with the one will, the capital one will, if we say, then we are then in a state of flow. And that's in a way the lesson of this journey between Aquarius and Pisces anyway. And with all these planets moving from one to the other, it does feel like things are opening up and we're aligning more with what is and going with the flow more. Even if that flow is, in this case, like a torrent, it's a bit scary. But at the same time, when we channel this energy, it is immense, it is powerful, it is going to create and recreate our lives for us in the coming months. I want to talk about the full and new moons also, and that is the full moon in Cancer by the very end of Cancer, the last degree of Cancer actually, and the lunar mansion here, the star sign Ashlesha. This is what makes Cancerians so attached. It's all about codependency and attachment. The symbol is a serpent and a coil serpent at that. So it's about clinging. That's what Ashlesha means. So it attaches itself. So obviously we have to think about our attachments for a full moon in Cancer on the 12th of February with the sun opposite in the more detached sign Capricorn. It's about getting a balance here, of course. And with a full moon at the very last degree of Cancer, it's about culmination points, ending points, and moving on. And in a way, also thinking about moving on from our attachments. And even if it's just an idea that we're attached to or a feeling, and essentially what a feeling is when we get attached is an emotion, right? So it's like when you have a feeling, but it's a time-stamped feeling. So we tend to get attached to thoughts and feelings, and then they become these emotions. And so obviously this is a highly emotive, emotional full moon in Cancer in Ashlesha. And again, it's worth considering stepping back from the emotional intensity and maybe detaching more from this process and releasing and unwinding. And that's the power of, I think, a full moon in Ashlesha, moving into Leo. And then, of course, the sun then moves into Aquarius opposite, and then we'll have the new moon in Aquarius by the end of the month. The new moon with the sun and moon in Aquarius, in the middle of Aquarius, and the star sign Shatabishaj is actually what we think about when we think about Aquarius more so, I think. Shatabishaj is translated as 100 healers. It's all about healing, of course, but it's also about innovation. And the symbol is an empty circle, and it could be correlated with the dark sun. It's like the opposite sign, Leo, is the sun, the light. But Shatabishaj is ruled by Varuna, the god of the depths of the ocean, the darkness, the dark realms, and mysticism. And, you can again call it a dark sun. And so they're opposite in quality. So the sun, the light, is in the domain of Varuna, the god of the oceans in Aquarius. So obviously that has a lot of connotations here with, water issues and all of that, and the sea and the vast ocean as well of consciousness. It feels like confusing on the one hand, but also just potential of everything. Everything is up for grabs in a way. And if we think about Aquarius and the sign of innovation and technology and all of this, everything is up for grabs, literally. I mean, we can see what's happening in AI now at the moment, but in our own personal lives as well, this need for transforming something and including everything. Aquarius is very much about inclusion. It's about everybody, big humanitarian issues and all of that too. And with the leader, the sun here, with the new moon, it's about considering everybody and the implications that it has on everybody. Now, again, if you're not considering the implications for yourself personally, or a leader doesn't consider the implications for everybody, that's a challenge. The sun does not like to be in Aquarius for this reason. So this new moon might be a reset around these big themes. Another big thing about this new moon, it's an important time because in the Hindu calendar, it's called Mahashivaratri. The day before, the night before, is the great night of Lord Shiva, the auspicious one. So it's very much about this stillness for this new moon. And a lot of people do fasting and meditation for the whole night of Lord Shiva. It's a powerful time to reconnect in, to reset, to reboot. I think this is like a major reboot, this new moon on the 28th of February. I mentioned the sun moving into Aquarius from the middle of the month and that new moon by the end of the month. And so the sun in Aquarius is challenged for sure, but that just again means in the world, leaders challenged again and how they're impacting humanity. But for our own selves individually, it's about our own sense of challenge in terms of whatever it is that we think we are, or what we do as, our own bright light. Leo is about where we feel proud and regal and we feel like we have some authority. But Sun in Aquarius is about how that impacts everybody. We can't get away with just doing our own thing and thinking we can do whatever the hell we want. As I said, this is not a time for that. It's a time for thinking about the implications of what we do and our impact on everybody. And everybody has an impact. That's the thing to think about here. So it's definitely a collective focus at this time on humanitarian issues. It's a peace drive. It's a time for, rising up and rising to the challenge and for humanity to go that extra bit, to really think about the world at large, not to just think about the few, It's not about the sun. It's not about you. It's not about the few. It's about everybody. The other thing I want to mention here is the Mars turning direct. Mars retrograde is generally, for most people, frustrating. Even for people who are born with Mars retrograde, they still get frustrated with Mars retrograde because it's going to retrograde likely in a different sign than it was when they were born. So then they're frustrated about something else. Mars is about being proactive usually, but when it's retrograde, it's reactive. So you react strongly and then you hold back at the same time. Now, the issue here is that once it goes direct, although going direct, great, is that it releases all of that pent-up energy and frustration, and it's likely to be volatile because of this. And what's so interesting is that Mars is stationing at the very degree that the sun is at in the American independence chart, and the sun ruling the leader, the government. So I think there's going to be a lot of anger unleashed either at the government or from the government in the US during this period at the end of February. And we have to be mindful of that, of course, as that impacts the whole world. And again, in our own lives, how does Mars impact us individually? How do we manage this energy that wants to erupt, like a volcano? And in Gemini, it's not a clean cut. It doesn't really function as well because it's more about thinking. And Mars doesn't like to think, it likes to act. But in Gemini, it has to think and think about the consequence and all of that in terms of what's going on in Aquarius. But now we're thinking also about our actions and how we have to think through our actions and plan ahead and all of these things. And Mars gets a bit frustrated with all of that. So though it's moving forward and all the planets are moving forward at this point by the 24th of February and for the next week, we have to consider the implications always. I don't want to sound like a fuddy-duddy and sort of thinking about all of this as like negative, but it's not always negative, obviously. It's about just anything we do has a consequence and to always remind ourselves of that. So looking ahead, I mentioned the Venus is now exalted in Pisces. Wonderful. Time to appreciate whatever you have to appreciate in your life. And everybody has something to appreciate. Doesn't matter who you are. I mean, when you're looking at the images of people in Gaza moving back to their homes that have been obliterated and they are crying with joy, I'm struck by that, by Venus exalted in Pisces with Rahu and Neptune conjunct and Saturn about to move in. And I'm like, oh my God, these people are moving back to rubble and they're in joy, crying at the joy of being able to move back to such a state. But it's their place, it's their rubble, it's their home. And I don't want to get political or anything about this. It's just a humanity. It's not about politics, it's about being humane. These are people who have been displaced for months and months now, and they're going back to rubble. Or people in LA, for example, they're going back to rubble. It's finding whatever it is, humanity in whatever, like people helping out other people. This is what Venus exalted is in Pisces. However, there's a big however, and I'm obviously very conscious of how I put this because now it sounds wonderful initially, but it is. But then it gets really complicated in March because then Venus goes retrograde in Pisces. And when a planet is exalted and retrograde, it behaves as if it's also debilitated. It's not actually debilitated, okay? So don't get me wrong, but it behaves as if it's debilitated. In other words, if Venus in Pisces is just seeing the best of humanity and being appreciative of whatever you have, whatever it is, whatever little thing it is, Venus retrograde in Pisces is seeing, the problems. Okay, that's wonderful, but all of that is wonderful, but there's always a but with a retrograde. And there's always an extreme with a retrograde. Retrograde planets are more extreme, just like the nodes. They behave in an all or nothing way. So it could be all full on appreciation and wonderful, and then all or nothing. And it's like it's disastrous. And this swinging wildly from one to the other is a problem, and with Venus, especially in Pisces. And don't think that it's not going to add to an issue here because there's major issues developing here in Pisces with all the gathering. And the last time we saw Venus retrograde in Pisces, conjunct Saturn and Rahu, was 1969. So that's not insignificant at all when we consider what's happening right now. Even if we think about what's happening with the US government and their plans to release documents that were hidden regarding the assassinations of Robert F. Kennedy and also Martin Luther King Jr., Saturn and Rahu together in Pisces in 1969. In this year, we're going to see Saturn and Rahu again in Pisces. Only briefly, though, in April and May. But the fact that Venus is now retrograde, again, a prelude to this in a way, it's like preempting something here. It could be just that. It could be that Donald Trump releases information about that. But it could also be a sort of similar theme coming back of assassinations, of uprisings, of, think about 1969, there was major upheavals. It's like the way that humanity shifts around these big themes is just fascinating to watch. But the very last time, just so for yourself to know that Venus was retrograde in Pisces was 2017. So looking back in your own life at these times, perhaps if you lived long enough, if you were alive in 1969 or more recently, 2017, thinking about what was going on in your life at that point in relation to what Venus rules and also what Pisces represents. So obviously we have to be more flexible, whatever we're setting forth in February. Because again, even though February feels like it's opening up and we're negotiating and everything is seemingly wonderful from the outset, there are major complications ahead. And then on top of that, I want to mention, though, it's again March, and I'll talk about it in March more. We have in March eclipses. So not only do we have all of these planets gather in Pisces, we have a lunar eclipse on March 14th. And then 2 weeks later, we have a partial solar eclipse in Pisces, the very sign where all of these planets are gathering. So it means that there's so much upheaval and changes and endings and everything's in flux in March that it feels like February needs to be a sort of a prelude to that. We need to be setting it up from February. And in other words, in our minds and our expectations of the complications ahead, we need to be open-minded, whatever we're doing in February. Even if it feels like everything is opened up and free and we can do whatever we want, we must factor in what's happening down the line. And even just simply, whatever plans you're making in February, make them, but be open-minded about them. Keep an open mind and an open heart about what's happening in February. Because you could easily, like I said, delude yourself. And instead, we need to use this time to be open and change things, but allow ourselves to change with the changing tides. We don't control the tides. So that is my 2 cents for February. And just to mention, for those who are already patrons, you'll already have received your sign-based forecast for the year. If you're not a patron already, though, consider going to patreon.com/timeline astrology, and you can go to my shop there as well. And you can find there's sometimes an hour and a half, depending on the sign, video forecasts for each sign for the year ahead. So if you wish to grab yours, you can just sign up. It's $5 a month. You can sign up for just 1 month if you prefer, and then get the forecast, even though the actual forecast is more expensive than that. I don't mind people doing that. And, you're welcome to join for a month, give it a go, and get your sign-based forecast and so much more. You get dailies and weekly reports and monthly in-depth reports for the month, and also monthly discussions where we meet and discuss all of these transits. I'm obviously just giving you a brief overview of all of the main transits here in February, but you can join us on Patreon and we'll discuss them in more depth. I hope you get something from that. I hope it lands for you in some way that is useful, that guides you in some way through what I think will be a highly volatile next few months. And yet at the same time, as I said, a time to dream up a new life and align with all of the possibilities that are just lining up for us now. And we need to use that. We don't want to shy away from it. We don't want to dissociate from the potentials right now. There's so much potential here, so much possibility. And that is essentially what Pisces is all about. It's all about potential and possibility. And if we constrict ourselves too much and limit ourselves to the way we've always been, we're not making use of what could be. I wish you all the best, and until next time.